The email from my parents' attorney arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between promotional newsletters and client updates. Mitchell Family Trust, proposed amendment. I almost scrolled past it, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the formal subject line, or perhaps some subconscious warning bell. Whatever it was, opening that message changed everything. As I read the document, my coffee grew cold beside me. There, in legal jargon that couldn't disguise its true purpose, was my parents' attempt to have me completely removed from our family trust. The financial legacy I'd been told since childhood would one day be shared equally among all Mitchell children. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Alex Mitchell, and this is how I discovered that my parents' decades of favoritism toward my cousin wasn't just emotional, it was about to become financial. But they never expected that their own banker would be the one to uncover whose money actually started that trust. A truth that would shatter our family's carefully constructed facade forever. My marketing agency had just landed our biggest client yet. After 7 years of grinding, starting from my apartment's kitchen table to now employing 15 people, Mitchell Creative was finally becoming the success I'd always envisioned. The celebration dinner with my team ran late, so I didn't check my personal email until the following morning. In accordance with the wishes of Richard and Helen Mitchell, trustees, this document proposes the removal of Alexander James Mitchell as beneficiary, with redistribution of entitlements to remaining beneficiaries Nathan Mitchell and Olivia Mitchell. I read the paragraph 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. My parents wanted to cut me out of the family trust entirely, the trust that had been established for all Mitchell descendants, the same trust that my father had used as leverage. My entire life. Behave this way, choose this career, live up to the Mitchell name because one day you'll be responsible for the family legacy. Alex? The Horizon team is waiting in the conference room. Megan, my assistant, poked her head into my office, then frowned. You look like you've seen a ghost. Sorry, I'm coming. I closed the email, but couldn't close the pit forming in my stomach. 3 back-to-back meetings kept me distracted until lunchtime, when I finally had a moment to call my sister. Did you know about this trust amendment? I asked the moment Olivia answered. The pause before she responded told me everything. Mom, and Dad mentioned they were making some changes, she finally said. Changes? Liv, they're cutting me out completely. You and Nathan get everything. Another pause. They feel you don't need it, Alex. Your business is doing well, and Nathan's startup is struggling, and I'm still paying off medical school debt, and… This isn't about need, I cut in. This is about Dad still being angry that I didn't join. Mitchell Publishing. It's punishment. Maybe if you came to Sunday dinner for once, talk to them. I missed 2 dinners, Olivia. 2. Because of client emergencies. You know how Dad is about family obligations. I rubbed my temple where a headache was forming. Richard Mitchell, 3rd-generation publisher and family patriarch, believed in tradition above all else. The weekly Sunday dinners, the annual summer retreats at Maple Ridge, the Mitchell name in publishing, not wasting talent on advertising nonsense, as he'd described my career choice. The trust was always supposed to be divided equally, I said. That was Grandpa William's wish. Maybe there's more to it than we know, Olivia offered, her voice softening. Come to dinner this Sunday. We can talk about it then. After hanging up, I stared at the Boston skyline through my office window. 7 years of minimal contact had been working fine. I ran my agency. They ran the publishing house. We exchanged perfunctory holiday greetings and occasionally saw each other at family functions. But this was different. This was my parents, attempting to rewrite a legal arrangement that predated all of us. I pulled up the contact information for the attorney who had sent the email. Jonathan Pierce of Pierce & Associates. the firm that had handled Mitchell family affairs for generations. Instead of calling, I decided to go directly to their offices in the financial district. The receptionist at Pierce & Associates seemed surprised by my unscheduled appearance, but directed me to a conference room where I waited nearly 30 minutes before Jonathan Pierce appeared. "Alex Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "It's been some time. How's the marketing business?" "Thriving," I replied coolly. "Unlike my position in the family trust, apparently." Pierce's professional smile dimmed. "Ah, you received my email. Can we skip the pleasantries? I want to know on what grounds my parents are attempting to remove me." He took a seat across from me, opening a leather portfolio. "The Mitchell Family Trust includes provisions allowing the trustees, currently, your parents, to make amendments regarding beneficiaries. Show me." He slid a document across the table, pointing to a paragraph of dense legal text. I read it twice, my advertising-trained eye catching the ambiguity immediately. This is intentionally vague. In the event of substantial change in circumstances or family structure. What substantial change are they claiming? Pierce looked uncomfortable. "Your parents feel your disconnection from family affairs constitutes such a change. I built my own business instead of joining the family one. That's success, not failure. They also cited your absence from family traditions and... Meanwhile, Nathan has burned through 3 failed startups using family money, but he shows up for Sunday pot roast, so he's in and I'm out?" Pierce adjusted his tie. "I merely prepare the documents as instructed by the trustees. Who established this trust? When? I want to see the original documents. Those would be in the archives. It was established in 1978, from what I recall. I want copies, all of them. The original trust document, any amendments, everything. I'll need to get the trustees' permission to—" "No, you don't," I interrupted. "As a named beneficiary, which I still am until this amendment is executed, I have legal right to view all trust documents. You know that, Mr. Pierce." The attorney's expression tightened, but he nodded. "I'll have copies prepared, but they'll take some time to retrieve from archives. I'll wait. It could be hours, possibly days. Then I suggest you get started." While Pierce delegated the retrieval to a paralegal, I made a call to my own attorney, Samantha Torres. Unlike Pierce, Samantha wasn't tied to my family's legacy or money. She had built her reputation defending underdogs against corporate giants, and we'd become friends after she helped one of my employees with an immigration issue. "They can try this, but it won't be easy," Samantha said after I explained the situation. "When can you get me those documents?" "Working on it now, but there's something else. The trust was always presented to us as the Mitchell family money. Publishing. Profits from my grandfather and father's time, but I don't know the full history." "Find out," Samantha advised. "Knowledge is leverage. And Alex, don't sign anything." 4 hours later, I left Pierce's office with a heavy envelope of documents and a growing sense that I was missing something important. The copies were old, some pages yellowed with age, but the text was clear enough. William Mitchell, my grandfather, had established the trust. However, the initial funding source was listed only as previously designated family assets. That night, I spread the documents across my dining table, looking for anything that might explain my parents' sudden decision or give me ammunition to fight it. The trust had started with $2.3 million in 1978, a substantial sum for that time, and had grown to nearly $12 million. The original beneficiaries were listed as all direct descendants of William and Eleanor Mitchell, which should have included me without question. I was deep in legal clauses when my phone rang. "Olivia. Mom told me you went to Pierce's office," she said without preamble. "Did she send you to talk me down?" "No, Olivia hesitated. "There's more going on, Alex. Dad's been acting strange, spending hours in the study with those old family albums. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I overheard him arguing with Uncle James about family obligations and what we promised. Uncle James was my father's older brother, who had chosen academia over publishing, and consequently had a similarly strained relationship with my father as I did. When was this? Last weekend. And something else. When I mentioned your name at dinner last Sunday, Mom dropped her glass. It's shattered everywhere. They're nervous, Alex. About me finding something? I don't know, but it feels off. After ending the call, I turned back to the documents with renewed purpose. If my parents were nervous, there was a reason. Something in the family's financial history that they didn't want examined too closely. The next morning, I made an appointment with Mitchell Publishing's bank. The trust's assets were held at First Atlantic Financial, where my father had banked for decades. I wasn't expecting much, just confirmation of basic details, but I needed to understand the trust's current structure before the amendment went through. David Chen, a private banking manager, greeted me in the lobby of the gleaming tower. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with meticulous attention to detail evident in everything from his precisely knotted tie to his organized approach as we settled into his office. Mitchell Publishing has been with First Atlantic for 3 generations, Chen noted as he pulled up records on his computer. Your father is highly regarded here. I'm sure he is, I replied. I'm interested specifically in the Mitchell family trust, its structure, funding history, and current status. Chen's fingers paused over his keyboard. I'll need to verify your authorization to access that information. I slid a copy of the trust document across his desk, pointing to my name among the beneficiaries. Will this suffice? He examined it carefully, then nodded. What specifically are you looking to understand? The origins. I have the formation documents, but they reference previously designated family assets. I want to know what those assets were. Chen frowned. That would be in the historical records. Before my time here, certainly. Can you access them? It may take some research. Our digital records don't go back that far with that level of detail. I handed him my business card. I'd appreciate anything you can find. It's important. As I stood to leave, Chen tilted his head, studying me. Mitchell, you're not in publishing, correct? No, I run a marketing agency, Mitchell Creative. Something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps. Interesting. Let me see what I can find about the trust's origins. Sunday arrived, and with it, the dreaded family dinner. Cedar Grove Estate, my parents' sprawling colonial home in Lakeside Hills, looked exactly as it always had. Imposing, perfectly maintained, suffocating in its perfection. I parked my Audi next to Nathan's ostentatious Tesla with the custom MTCHLN license plate and took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Helen Mitchell, ever the publisher's wife, had mastered the art of the warm yet dignified greeting. Alex, darling, she air-kissed near my cheek. What a pleasant surprise. It's been... how long? 3 months, Mom. Christmas. Has it been that long? Well, everyone's in the parlor. Your father's showing Nathan some first editions. The parlor was my father's domain, lined with bookshelves containing rare books and publishing memorabilia. As I entered, the conversation halted. Richard Mitchell, still imposing at 68, looked up from an open book, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Alexander, he said, as if my arrival was both unexpected and slightly inconvenient. Join us. I was just showing Nathan the Steinbeck first edition we acquired. Nathan, 2 years younger than me and perpetually attempting to earn my father's approval, offered a tight smile. Cousin, heard your agency landed Horizon Industries. Impressive. Thank you. I accepted a glass of wine from my mother, who had followed me in. Though apparently not impressive enough to keep me in the family trust, The room went silent. My father removed his reading glasses, a gesture I recognized from childhood confrontations. I see Jonathan has been in touch. You could have told me yourself. Or is removing me from my inheritance too uncomfortable to say to my face? Don't be dramatic, Alexander, my mother cut in. It's a simple restructuring based on current family needs. Needs? Or punishment? I looked directly at my father. Is this still about me not joining Mitchell Publishing? Richard set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. This is about responsible stewardship of family resources. Your sister is completing her medical residency with substantial debt. Nathan is developing important innovations in digital publishing that could benefit the company. Meanwhile, you've made it abundantly clear that you want nothing to do with the family business. So my inheritance goes to Nathan's digital publishing experiments? The same Nathan who's burned through 2 rounds of family funding already? Nathan flushed. My current platform has major publisher interest. That's enough, my father interrupted. The decision has been made. The trust was always intended. To support the Mitchell Publishing legacy, you chose a different path. Grandpa William's trust was for all his descendants, I countered. Not just the ones who followed your approved career path. A new voice entered the conversation. He's right, Richard. We all turned to see Uncle James standing in the doorway. Unlike my father with his tailored suit, James wore a casual blazer, over a button-down shirt, the semi-retired academic who'd never quite fit the Mitchell mold. This is a family matter, James, my father said stiffly. The trust is a family matter, James agreed, moving into the room. One that involves all of us, including Alex. And Eleanor. Eleanor has nothing to do with this, my mother said quickly. Too quickly. Eleanor. I looked between them. Grandma Eleanor? She passed away before I was born. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Uncle James looked at my father with what seemed like a challenge in his eyes. Perhaps we should move to the dining room, my mother suggested, her hostess instincts kicking in to diffuse tension. Cook has prepared beef Wellington. Dinner was excruciating. Forced conversation about Nathan's latest digital prototype, Olivia's hospital rotation, neighborhood gossip that excluded me entirely. I pushed food around my plate, watching the family dynamics with new eyes. My father and Uncle James barely spoke to each other. My mother refilled her wine glass more frequently than usual. Nathan dominated the conversation, clearly enjoying his favored status. As dessert was served, my phone vibrated with an incoming email. Normally, I wouldn't check during a family meal, but I was desperate for distraction. The sender was David, Chen from First Atlantic Financial. The message was brief. Found something interesting in archive records. Can we meet tomorrow? Urgent. As I looked up from my phone, I caught Uncle James watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, perhaps, or warning. Work emergency? My father asked, disapproval evident. Something like that, I replied, tucking my phone away. Speaking of work, Uncle James, I'd love to hear about your research. Mom mentioned you're writing a book about family businesses? James looked surprised at my interest. Yes, focusing on the evolution of family enterprises through generations, particularly how founding values can become diluted or reinterpreted. Fascinating, I said, genuinely interested but also aware of how the topic might irritate my father. How does one determine the true founding values when each generation might remember them differently? An excellent question, James nodded. Often it requires going back to primary sources, original documents, letters, contemporaneous accounts. Memory is fallible and sometimes, he glanced at my father, convenient. If you're implying, my father began. More coffee, anyone? My mother interrupted. After dinner, as everyone moved back to the parlor, Uncle James caught my arm in the hallway. Meet me at Maple Ridge next weekend, he said quietly. There are things you should know. Things about your grandmother. What things? He shook his head. Not here. Saturday, 10 a.m. Come alone. Before I could press him further, my father called from the parlor, and James moved away, leaving me with more questions than answers. The following morning, I arrived at First Atlantic. Financial 15 minutes early for my appointment with David Chen. The banking hall buzzed with Monday morning activity. Wealth managers escorting clients to private rooms, tellers handling transactions, security guards standing at discreet attention. Chen greeted me promptly, leading me not to his office but to a small conference room in a quiet corridor. I thought this would be more private, he explained, closing the door. What I found is unusual. Unusual how? He placed an aged folder on the table. Our digital records only go back to the mid-1990s with full detail. For earlier transactions, we have to access physical archives. I found the original account opening documents for the Mitchell Family Trust. Chen opened the folder, revealing papers with the distinctive typography of late 1970s word processors. According to our records, the initial funding for the trust, $2.3 million in 1978, didn't come from Mitchell publishing profits as you might have assumed. Where did it come from? A personal account belonging to Eleanor Mitchell, your grandmother. I stared at him. That's impossible. The Mitchell fortune came from the publishing house. My grandfather built the business. The publishing house was successful, yes, Chen acknowledged. But this money came from a separate source, an inheritance that Eleanor Mitchell received in 1977, shortly before the trust was established. An inheritance from whom? Chen hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. The funds were transferred from an account at Somerset Trust Bank, which was acquired by First Atlantic in the 1980s. The original source documentation isn't in our system. But it was definitely her money, not my grandfather's. The account was solely in Eleanor Mitchell's name. And there's something else. He turned a page in the folder. The original trust document specified that the assets were to be held for all direct descendants of William and Eleanor Mitchell, with special provision that no beneficiary may be removed without unanimous consent of all adult beneficiaries. I felt a surge of vindication. So they can't cut me out without my agreement. Based on the original document, no, but... Chen frowned. There appears to have been an amendment in 1992 after Eleanor's death, giving the trustees, your parents, more discretion. When grandfather was still alive, would he have agreed to that? The timing is interesting. William Mitchell suffered a stroke in late 1991, according to our client notes. He remained the technical grantor, but your father gained signatory power during his recovery. The amendment was processed during that period. My mind raced. So my father changed the terms while his father was incapacitated, giving himself more control over money that originally came from his mother? Chen's expression remained neutral, but he didn't contradict me. I can only tell you what the records show, but as your family's banker, I should mention that unusual activity around trusts during periods of incapacity sometimes raise compliance concerns. You think there was something improper about the amendment? I didn't say that, Chen clarified. But if you're contesting the recent changes, the circumstances of the 1992 amendment might be relevant. I studied him, wondering why he was helping me. Why did you dig into this, Mr. Chen? Most bankers would simply defer to the current trustees. Something shifted in his professional demeanor. My mother worked at Somerset Trust before the merger. She was a junior account manager for Eleanor Mitchell. Did she know something about this money? Chen hesitated. She mentioned once that Eleanor Mitchell was more than she seemed. I didn't understand what she meant until I saw these records. He closed the folder. I can make copies of these documents for you as a beneficiary, but I suggest you find out more about your grandmother's inheritance. The Somerset Trust records would have been transferred to our archives during the merger. As I left the bank with copies of the documents, I felt as though the ground beneath my family narrative was shifting. My grandmother, a woman I'd only seen in photographs, always elegantly dressed and positioned slightly behind my commanding grandfather, had apparently been the source of our family wealth. A fact that my father had obscured so thoroughly that even I, his son, had never questioned the story that the Mitchell fortune came solely from publishing. That evening, as I reviewed the bank documents in my apartment, a text arrived from Olivia. "Mom and Dad in closed-door meeting with Pierce all afternoon. Something's up. Be careful." I called her immediately. "What happened after I left yesterday?" "Dad and Uncle James had a huge fight," Olivia replied. "I couldn't hear most of it, but James yelled something about honoring her wishes, and Dad shouted back about family loyalty. Then this morning, Dad was on the phone at 7 a.m. demanding an emergency meeting with Pierce. They're accelerating the amendment, I realized, trying to push it through before I can find something. Find what, Alex? What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share with Olivia. She'd always been closer to our parents, the dutiful daughter balancing my rebellion. But her warning suggested she wasn't entirely on their side in this. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I said carefully, "but it has something to do with Grandma Eleanor and where the trust money really came from. Are you free tomorrow evening? I could use your help with something." "My shift ends at 6. What do you need?" "Meet me at the estate. Dad keeps all the family records in his study. There might be something there about Grandma's family or inheritance." The next evening, Olivia's, Honda pulled up behind my car at Cedar Grove Estate. She still had her hospital ID clipped to her jacket and looked exhausted after her shift, but her eyes held determination. "Dad and Mom are at the Rosewood Club for their standing Tuesday dinner," she confirmed. "Housekeeper left at 4. We have about 3 hours. "Should be enough time," I said, unlocking the door with my rarely used key. The house was eerily quiet as we made our way to our father's study. The room was exactly as I remembered, leather-bound books lining the walls, the massive oak desk dominating the center, the faint smell of pipe tobacco, though Dad had quit smoking years ago. "What exactly are we looking for?" Olivia asked, eyeing the imposing rows of filing cabinets. "Anything about Grandma Eleanor's family," I explained. "Financial records, letters, photographs with notes, especially from around 1977 or 1978. "Why those years specifically?" I hesitated, then decided Olivia deserved the full truth. "Because that's when Grandma received a massive inheritance that actually funded the Mitchell Family Trust, money that supposedly came from Grandpa's publishing success." Olivia's eyes widened. "That can't be right. Dad always said—" "I know what Dad always said," I interrupted gently. "But I've seen the bank records. The initial $2.3 million came directly from Eleanor Mitchell's personal account, money she inherited just before the trust was created." Olivia sank into one of the leather chairs. "That doesn't make sense. Grandma was just a housewife. She came from a middle-class family in Vermont. Where would she get that kind of money?" "That's exactly what we need to find out." We divided the study between us. I took the filing cabinets while Olivia examined the bookshelves, looking for family albums or hidden compartments. After 40 minutes of searching through mundane household records and publishing correspondence, I found a locked drawer at the bottom of the second cabinet. "Do you know where Dad keeps his keys?" I asked. Olivia thought for a moment. "Try the grandfather clock in the hallway. He keeps a spare set in the maintenance compartment." Sure enough, a small key ring hung inside the antique clock's base. The third key I tried opened the locked drawer. Inside were several aged manila folders labeled simply Eleanor. "Olivia, I found something." She joined me on the floor as I spread out the contents. Birth certificates, marriage license, old photographs, standard family documentation. But beneath these was a sealed envelope marked Somerset Trust, E.M. Private. My fingers trembled slightly as I carefully opened the brittle envelope. Inside was a bank statement from 1977. The paper was yellowed with age, but the figures were clear. A deposit of $2,275,000 into Eleanor Mitchell's personal account from J. Harrington Estate. Harrington? Olivia frowned. Wasn't that Grandma's maiden name? No, her maiden name was Campbell, Eleanor Campbell Mitchell. We exchanged puzzled glances before continuing through the documents. Near the bottom of the stack, I found a newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald, dated March 1977. Harrington Shipping heir leaves fortune to former employee. James Harrington, last surviving member of the Harrington shipping dynasty, has left the bulk of his $10 million estate to former Secretary Eleanor Mitchell in a move that has shocked Boston society. Harrington, who died childless at 87, changed his will just months before his death, naming Mitchell as primary beneficiary over distant relatives. Mitchell, now married to rising publisher William Mitchell, worked as Harrington's personal secretary from 1942-1948. I handed the clipping to Olivia, my mind racing. She worked for this shipping magnate before marrying Grandpa. Olivia read the article twice. And he left her millions decades later? That seems unusual, I finished. Very unusual. Digging deeper into the folder, we found a handwritten letter on Somerset Trust letterhead addressed to Eleanor. My dear Mrs. Mitchell, as requested, I've structured the trust according to your specifications. The full amount will be designated for all your direct descendants, with provisions that no beneficiary may be removed without unanimous consent. I understand your wish to protect future generations from potential family discord. I must again urge caution regarding your desire to obscure the source of these funds. While there is nothing improper about your inheritance from Mr. Harrington, allowing the assumption that the money originated from Mitchell Publishing may create complications in the future. However, as always, I will respect your wishes in this matter. With highest regards, Marcus Pearson, Trust Manager, Somerset Trust. Olivia and I stared at each other. She deliberately hid where the money came from, I said slowly, and made sure none of us could be cut out of the trust. But why would she hide it? And why would Dad change that provision after she died? Before I could respond, a final document caught my eye. A faded photograph of a much younger Eleanor, perhaps in her 20s, standing beside an older man on what appeared to be a ship deck. They were both smiling, her hand resting on his arm with familiar ease. Written on the back in elegant script, James and me, Cape Cod, 1947. The last voyage. Do you think they were? Olivia began delicately. I don't know, I admitted. But whatever their relationship, it was significant enough for him to leave her millions decades later. Money that became our family trust, which Dad has controlled the narrative around ever since. The sound of a car on the gravel driveway made us both freeze. That's Dad's Mercedes, Olivia whispered, panic flashing across her face. We hastily returned the documents to the folder, but there wasn't time to lock everything away properly. I shoved the most important papers, the bank statement, the trust letter, and the photograph, into my jacket pocket. What are we going to say? Olivia asked as we heard the front door open. We're getting some old family photos for my office, I improvised, quickly pulling a random family album from the shelf as footsteps approached the study. The door swung open to reveal our father, still in his dinner jacket, his expression transitioning from surprise to suspicion in an instant. Alexander, Olivia, what are you doing here? His eyes darted to the open filing drawer, the scattered papers we hadn't managed to hide. Hi, Dad, Olivia said with forced brightness. Alex needed some family photos for his new office, and I was helping him look. Richard Mitchell stepped fully into the room, his gaze hardening as he spotted the folder marked Eleanor, partially visible beneath the album in my hands. In my private files? Without permission? His voice was controlled, but ice cold. Those documents are confidential. Confidential? I challenged, unable to contain myself. Or just inconvenient to your version of family history? Like the fact that Grandma Eleanor's inheritance from James Harrington funded the trust, not your publishing success? My father went perfectly still, color draining from his face. You have no idea what you're talking about. I've seen the bank records, I pressed. And now these documents. The trust was Eleanor's money, set up to provide for all her descendants equally. You changed the terms after her death while Grandpa was incapacitated. Why, Dad? To control who gets access? To punish those who don't follow your rules? You need to leave, he said quietly. Now. Richard? What's going on? My mother appeared in the doorway, still wearing her pearl necklace and evening dress from dinner. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. The open drawer, the scattered papers, my confrontational stance. They were going through my files, my father said tightly. Alexander has been investigating the family finances, making wild accusations. Not wild if they're true, I countered. Mom, did you know? About Grandma Eleanor's inheritance? About how Dad changed the trust terms while Grandpa was recovering from his stroke. Helen Mitchell's hand went to her pearls, a nervous habit I recognized from childhood confrontations. Alexander, please. Some matters are best left in the past. Like where our family money actually came from? Like the fact that Dad's been controlling access to money that was never meant to be used that way? You have no understanding of the complexities involved, my father snapped. Your grandmother's situation was delicate. The decisions made were for the protection of this family's reputation. What was so delicate about her receiving an inheritance? Olivia asked, finding her voice. Unless there was something more to her relationship with James Harrington than just employer and secretary? A tense silence fell over the room. My mother looked away, unwilling to meet our eyes. Get out, my father finally said. Both of you, and Alexander. If you pursue this further, I'll make sure the trust amendment goes through immediately. You can try, I replied, clutching the papers in my pocket. But Grandma's original trust terms required unanimous consent from adult beneficiaries to remove anyone. I'm betting that provision still has legal standing, regardless of your 1992 amendment. Something flashed in my father's eyes. Anger, certainly, but also fear. You have until Friday to reconsider your position, he said. After that, the family attorneys will proceed with or without your cooperation. Olivia and I left Cedar Grove, estate in tense silence, the weight of decades-old secrets hanging between us. Once in my car, I handed her the documents I'd taken. We need to understand exactly what happened, I said. Between Grandma and this Harrington man, and why Dad is so desperate to control this narrative. Uncle James, Olivia suggested. He's the only one old enough to know the truth who might actually tell us. He mentioned Maple Ridge this weekend, I remembered. Said there were things I should know about Grandma. He must have realized. Dad was moving against you with the trust amendment, Olivia said thoughtfully. But why not just tell you outright? Family loyalty, I guessed. He might be willing to point me in the right direction, but not to openly betray his brother without giving him a chance to handle it properly first. We agreed to meet again Thursday evening to plan our approach for the Maple Ridge meeting with Uncle James. Olivia would look into the Harrington family history, while I intended to revisit First Atlantic Financial to see what else David Chen might uncover about the trust's amendment during Grandpa's illness. Wednesday morning brought a terse email from Jonathan Pierce, indicating that the trust amendment proposal had been submitted for legal review, with a projected execution date of Monday, considerably sooner than the timeline originally presented. My father was clearly accelerating his efforts to remove me. I forwarded the email to Samantha Torres, adding the new information about the original trust terms requiring unanimous consent from beneficiaries. Her response was immediate. This is significant. Can you send me all documentation you found? I'll file for an emergency injunction if necessary. Later that afternoon, I returned to First Atlantic Financial. David Chen seemed unsurprised to see me again and led me directly to the same private conference room. "I assume you've learned more since our last meeting," he said, setting down a fresh folder. My grandmother's inheritance came from a man named James Harrington, the shipping magnate. She worked as his secretary in the 1940s, and he left her millions in 1977, decades later. Chen nodded. That aligns with what I found. Harrington Shipping was a major client of Somerset Trust before the merger. After reviewing the transfer records, I can confirm that $2.3 million went directly from the Harrington estate settlement into Mrs. Mitchell's account and then into the newly established family trust. What about the 1992 amendment? The one my father pushed through while my grandfather was recovering from his stroke. Chen opened his folder. I found the transaction records from that period. During February to April 1992, there were multiple meetings between Richard Mitchell and Jonathan Pierce at this bank. Our records indicate that William Mitchell was still the legal grantor, but Richard had been granted financial power of attorney during his recovery. Did anyone from the bank verify Grandpa's consent to the amendment? A slight frown crossed Chen's face. There's a signature on the amendment documents, but no record of in-person verification with William Mitchell. It was unusual protocol, especially for a change of this magnitude. Meaning it might not have been properly authorized, I translated. I cannot make that determination, Chen said carefully. But I would note that current banking procedures would require much more rigorous verification for such changes. He hesitated, then added, There's something else. When the amendment was processed, the bank manager involved was Theodore Whitman, your father's former college roommate, according to our client relationship notes. The implications were difficult to ignore. My father had used his power of attorney to alter a trust worth millions while his own father was incapacitated, with his college friend overseeing the transaction. If not technically illegal, it certainly raised ethical questions. Is there any record of communication from my grandmother about her intentions for the trust? Letters? Recorded instructions? Anything? Chen shook his head. Not in our digital archives. If such documents exist, they would be in the original paper records in our central storage facility. Those would require formal authorization to access, more than I can provide informally. Could my status as a beneficiary grant that authorization? Possibly, but it would take time, likely weeks, to process such a request. Time I didn't have if my father pushed through the amendment by Monday. Chen seemed to read my thoughts. There might be another approach. The Somerset Trust merger included transfer of all client documentation. Sometimes personal bankers kept client notes that weren't officially part of the record. My mother worked with your grandmother. She might remember something helpful. Would she be willing to speak with me? She's retired now, living north of the city. I can ask, but I must be clear. Anything she shares would be her personal recollection, not official bank documentation. I nodded gratefully. At this point, personal recollections might be the only way to understand what really happened. As I was leaving, Chen called after me. Mr. Mitchell, be careful with how you proceed. Family trusts of this magnitude, people can become very protective of them. My father, you mean? Your father, yes, but also others who benefit from the current arrangement. Your cousin Nathan, for instance, has had numerous meetings with your father at this bank in recent months. That detail wasn't particularly surprising, given Nathan's favoritism in the family, but it reinforced my suspicion that his interests were directly opposed to mine in this situation. By Thursday morning, Chen had arranged a meeting with his mother, Lynn Chen, at her home in a quiet suburb north of Boston. As I navigated the tree-lined streets of her neighborhood, I reflected on how quickly my life had been upended. A week ago, I had been focused entirely on growing my agency, content with the distant but functional relationship I maintained with my family. Now I was chasing decades-old secrets that might determine not just my financial future, but my understanding of my entire family history. Lin Chen's home was a modest but elegant ranch-style house with immaculate gardens. She greeted me at the door with a dignified nod, her resemblance to her son immediately apparent in her analytical gaze and precise mannerisms. After David made introductions, he excused himself to take a work call, leaving us in her sunlit living room. "My son tells me you're seeking information about Eleanor Mitchell," she began, pouring tea from a delicate porcelain pot. I was quite junior when I worked with her, but she made an impression. Very proper, very precise about her financial affairs. "Did you know about her connection to James Harrington?" Lynn's hands stilled momentarily. "Yes. When his estate was settled, I assisted the senior manager with the transfer. It was noteworthy. Not many former secretaries inherit millions from their employers, especially after decades have passed. Do you know why he left her the money?" She considered the question carefully. Mrs. Mitchell never discussed it directly, but I remember something she said when setting up the family trust almost immediately after receiving the inheritance. She said, "This money must be protected from those who would control it for their own purposes. It belongs to all the children, equally." She was quite insistent on that point. Did she ever explain what she meant by those who would control it? Not explicitly. But she once mentioned that her husband, your grandfather, had very traditional views about family money and who deserved access to it. Lynn sipped her tea thoughtfully. I had the impression she was creating a safeguard against those views being imposed on future generations. "Like me," I murmured. "Who chose marketing over publishing?" Lynn nodded. When she established the trust, she included very specific language about beneficiaries. All descendants were to benefit equally, and no beneficiary could be removed without unanimous consent from all adult beneficiaries. It was unusual language for that time. And did my grandfather know where the money really came from? "This is where things become delicate," Lynn replied. The official narrative was that the trust was funded by publishing success. But Mrs. Mitchell specifically instructed the bank to maintain separate records showing the true source. She told me once, "The truth should always be available, even if it isn't always discussed." "Do you think there was something improper about her relationship with Harrington?" I asked directly. Lynn considered this. "I cannot speculate on the nature of their personal connection, but I can tell you that after Mrs. Mitchell died in 1992, your father came to Somerset Trust multiple times, seeking to consolidate all records related to the Harrington inheritance. He seemed concerned about their contents. Were there rumors about Grandma and Harrington?" "Boston banking circles had their whispers," Lynn acknowledged. "Some suggested she had been more than a secretary to him. Others pointed to similarities between your Uncle James and old photographs of Harrington in their younger years." She paused significantly. "Your uncle was born in 1948, shortly after Eleanor left Harrington's employment." The implication hit me with sudden clarity. "You're suggesting Uncle James might actually be Harrington's son? That Grandma was involved with him before marrying Grandpa?" "I am merely noting a coincidence of timing and certain observations made by those who knew both men," Lynn replied diplomatically. "But it might explain why Harrington left his fortune to Eleanor decades later, to provide for her children, including possibly his own child. It would also explain my father's desperate efforts to control the trust and the family narrative. If Uncle James was actually a Harrington by blood, not a Mitchell, if the older brother my father had competed with his entire life wasn't even his full brother, the psychological impact would be significant. Even more disturbing was the possibility that my grandfather might never have known the truth." "One more question," I said. "The 1992 amendment to the trust, The one that gave my parents more control over beneficiaries. Did you know anything about that? Lynn's expression turned grave. That amendment was processed after I had moved to a different department. But I heard concerns from colleagues. Your grandfather was quite ill at the time, and there were questions about whether he fully understood what he was signing. But the bank approved it anyway? The bank manager at the time was a personal friend of your father's. In today's regulatory environment, such a change would have required much more rigorous verification of the grantor's intent. As David returned from his call, our conversation shifted to more general topics, but Lynn squeezed my hand meaningfully as I was leaving. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman who valued fairness above all. Whatever you discover, remember that her primary concern was always for her descendants. All of them. On the drive back to Boston, I called Olivia to share what I'd learned. She listened in silence as I relayed Lin Chen's implications about Uncle James possibly being Harrington's biological son. That would explain so much, she finally said. Uncle James always seemed like the odd one out, the academic in a family of publishers. And Dad's competitive attitude toward him always seemed excessive for normal sibling rivalry. It also explains Dad's obsession with the Mitchell publishing legacy and Nathan's place in it, I added. If James isn't truly a Mitchell by blood, then Dad is the only real Mitchell heir of his generation, and he needs Nathan to continue the bloodline in the business. What about the trust amendment deadline? Pierce's email said Monday. I'm meeting with Samantha tomorrow morning. With everything we've discovered, she thinks we have grounds for an emergency injunction to prevent the amendment from proceeding. And then, on Saturday, you're meeting Uncle James at Maple Ridge, Olivia finished. Do you think he knows? About potentially being Harrington's son? I don't know, but he specifically mentioned things I should know about Grandma. This has to be it. I want to come with you. I hesitated. Dad would see that as both of us betraying him. Maybe it's time we stopped worrying about Dad's approval, Olivia said with uncharacteristic determination. This affects both of us. And if there's one thing I've learned as a doctor, it's that family secrets can be as toxic as any disease. Friday brought a flurry of legal activity. Samantha Torres filed for an emergency injunction based on the original trust language requiring unanimous consent from beneficiaries for removal. She also raised concerns about the 1992 amendment's legitimacy, given William Mitchell's health condition at the time. By afternoon, we received notice that a hearing was scheduled for Wednesday, 2 days after my father's intended execution date for the amendment. Samantha immediately moved for a temporary restraining order to maintain the status quo until the hearing. As we waited for the judge's decision on the TRO, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Nathan's number, the first time he'd contacted me directly in years. Cousin, his voice was taut with barely controlled anger. What exactly do you think you're doing with these legal maneuvers? Protecting my inheritance, I replied evenly. The same one Grandma Eleanor intended for all her descendants. You have your precious agency, he snapped. You don't need trust money. The family business, however. This isn't about need, Nathan. It's about right and wrong. The trust wasn't meant to be a reward for joining the family business. It was meant to be shared equally among all descendants. You have no idea what this could do to Uncle Richard, he said, using the formal address he'd adopted since childhood. The stress, the public scrutiny if this becomes a court battle. Why are you really calling, Nathan? To make me feel guilty, or to find out how much I know? A telling pause. What do you mean? About Grandma Eleanor, about where the trust money really came from, about why Dad is so desperate to control the narrative around our family history. His voice lowered. Whatever you think you know, I know enough to understand why Dad sees you as the future of Mitchell Publishing, while I'm expendable. Blood matters to him, Nathan. Mitchell blood. Another pause, longer this time. This conversation is over. But consider yourself warned. Uncle Richard won't take this challenge lightly. There are things you don't understand. things that could damage us all if they become public. Like what happened in 1992 when Dad changed the trust terms while Grandpa was incapacitated. Or something older, from the 1940s, perhaps. The line went dead. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Nathan just called Dad in a panic. Meeting at Cedar Grove tonight. What did you say to him?" I replied simply, "Enough. To make him nervous. Meet tomorrow at my place, 8 a.m. We'll drive to Maple Ridge together." By evening, Samantha had secured the temporary restraining order. The judge had ruled that no changes to the trust beneficiaries could proceed until after Wednesday's hearing. It was a small victory, but it bought us time. Time to meet with Uncle James and hopefully learn the full truth that my father had worked so hard to conceal. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool as Olivia arrived at my apartment building. She looked tired but determined, clutching a folder of her own research on the Harrington family. "I found some old newspaper photographs," she said as we settled into my car for the drive to Maple Ridge. "James Harrington in his 30s and 40s. The resemblance to Uncle James is striking." She showed me several printouts, grainy, images of a tall, lean man with distinctive features that were indeed remarkably similar to our uncle's. One photograph from 1945 showed him at a shipping industry gala, and in the background, partially obscured but recognizable, was a young Eleanor Campbell years before she would become a Mitchell. They knew each other socially before she worked for him, Olivia noted. That suggests their relationship might have been more complex than employer-secretary from the start. The drive to Maple Ridge took nearly 2 hours, winding through increasingly rural landscapes. The family retreat was a modest cabin compared to Cedar Grove Estate, a deliberate choice by our grandmother, who had favored its simplicity and seclusion on the shores of a small lake. As we pulled into the gravel drive, Uncle James was already there, sitting on the porch with a book open on his lap. He looked up as we approached, his expression shifting from surprise at seeing Olivia to resignation, as if he'd expected the complications of this conversation to multiply. "I see you brought reinforcements," he said, standing to greet us. "Perhaps that's for the best. Some truths are better shared widely than held in confidence." The interior of the cabin was much as I remembered from childhood visits. Knotty pine, walls, comfortable but worn furniture, shelves lined with books rather than the rare first editions my father collected. James led us to the main room where a fire was already crackling in the stone fireplace despite the mild weather. On the coffee table lay several photograph albums and what appeared to be old letters tied with faded ribbon. "I gather you've been doing some investigating," he said without preamble. "What have you discovered so far?" I exchanged glances with Olivia before answering. "We know the Mitchell Family Trust was actually funded by Grandma Eleanor's inheritance from James Harrington in 1977. We know she created specific provisions requiring all descendants to benefit equally, provisions Dad altered in 1992, while Grandpa was recovering from his stroke. And we suspect," I hesitated, "that I might be Harrington's biological son," James finished calmly. "Yes, that particular family secret has been the elephant in the room for decades." Olivia gasped softly. "So it's true?" James sighed, reaching for one of the photo albums. Eleanor Campbell met James Harrington at a charity function in 1942 when she was 22. He was 45, already successful, and immediately taken with her intelligence and poise. He hired her as his personal secretary, but their relationship evolved over time into something deeper. He opened the album to reveal photographs we'd never seen. Eleanor and Harrington on his yacht, at various social functions, looking unmistakably intimate despite the formal poses of the era. By 1946, they were deeply in love, but there were complications. Harrington was divorced, scandalous enough for that time, and the age difference raised eyebrows in Boston society. When Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in late 1947, they faced difficult choices. "So you are his son," I said softly. James nodded. Biologically, yes. But William Mitchell never knew. Or if he did, he never acknowledged it. He was a young publisher who had met Eleanor at literary events. When she left Harrington's employment abruptly in 1948, citing family obligations, William courted her intensively. They married quickly, and he raised me as his own son, born prematurely but healthy. Did you always know? Olivia asked. Not until after Eleanor died in 1992. She left me a private letter explaining everything: her relationship with Harrington, my true parentage, and most importantly, the trust. James pulled out an envelope from among the items on the table. I've brought a copy for you both. The letter, dated just weeks before our grandmother's death, was heartbreakingly direct. My dearest James, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and it's time you knew the full truth of your heritage and the provisions I've made for all my beloved grandchildren. James Harrington was your biological father. Our relationship began before I joined his company and continued until circumstances forced our separation. When I discovered I was carrying you, Boston society made it impossible for us to be together, openly without dire consequences for us both. With great pain, we decided I should marry William, who had been courting me and was willing to claim you as his own. Harrington never forgot us. He watched your academic achievements from afar with immense pride, though he could never acknowledge you publicly. When he was dying in 1977, childless except for you, he left the bulk of his fortune to me with a single purpose: to provide equally for all my descendants, regardless of their paths in life. Whether they chose publishing or academia or art or business, he wanted all my children and grandchildren to have the freedom he and I were denied. The Mitchell Family Trust was created with this intention explicitly stated. No beneficiary may be removed without unanimous consent from all adult beneficiaries. I deliberately kept the origin of these funds obscure at William's request. He preferred the world believe his publishing success alone provided for his family. But the legal documentation exists at Somerset Trust showing the true source. Richard has always suspected the truth about your parentage, which explains his competitive nature toward you and his obsession with Mitchell blood in the family business. I fear that after I'm gone, he may attempt to change the trust terms, to exclude those he deems unworthy, or to favor those who follow his approved path. If this happens, this letter authorizes you to reveal the truth about the money, about your parentage, about my explicit wishes for its equal distribution. The trust is not Richard's to control according to his biases. It belongs to all of you equally. With eternal love, your mother, Eleanor. Olivia wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. Grandma really did think of everything. She was always 10 steps ahead, James agreed with a sad smile. Unfortunately, she didn't anticipate how quickly Richard would move to alter the trust after her death, while William was incapacitated. By the time I realized what had happened, the changes were already implemented. But why didn't you challenge it then? I asked. James sighed heavily. Family loyalty, partly. Despite everything, Richard is still my brother, or half-brother, and William raised me as his son without question, but also because the amended terms hadn't yet been used to actually exclude anyone. It remained theoretical until you, Alex, the first grandchild to truly forge an independent path. So when you heard about the proposed amendment to remove me, I knew it was time to finally honor Eleanor's wishes, James confirmed. Her letter specifically authorizes disclosure if Richard attempted to use the trust to control or punish family members who didn't conform to his vision. We've already filed for an injunction, I told him, based on the original trust terms requiring unanimous consent from beneficiaries. The hearing is Wednesday. And Richard knows you're investigating, James guessed, which explains his accelerated timeline for the amendment. We need you to testify, Olivia said suddenly. About Grandma's letter, about Dad's amendment while Grandpa was ill. You're the only one who can confirm all of this. James looked pained. That would mean publicly acknowledging my biological parentage, something I've kept private my entire life. It would also permanently damage my relationship with Richard. Hasn't he already damaged that relationship by trying to use the trust as a weapon? I countered. By disregarding Grandma's explicit wishes? Before James could respond, my phone rang. Samantha Torres. I excused myself to take the call on the porch. "Alex, something's happened," she said without preamble. "Pierce filed an emergency motion this morning claiming you obtained confidential financial documents illegally. He's seeking to have our injunction dissolved and the amendment fast-tracked, based on alleged criminal conduct by you in accessing private family records." My stomach dropped. "That's absurd. I'm a beneficiary. I have a right to those documents." "Technically, you had a right to request them through proper channels, not to remove them from your father's office," Samantha clarified. "It's a legal gray area, but enough to potentially sway the judge. We need something definitive, original documentation proving the trust's actual terms and intent." I glanced back through the window at James, still deep in conversation with Olivia. "I think I know where to get it." I returned to the cabin and quickly explained the situation to James and Olivia. "Pierce is claiming I obtained documents. Illegally," I concluded. "They're trying to fast-track the amendment before Wednesday's hearing." James rubbed his forehead, a gesture so similar to one of my father's habits that I wondered how I'd never noticed their differences before. Richard always did prefer aggressive legal tactics when backed into a corner. "We need the original trust documents," I pressed. "Not just copies, but the actual paperwork filed with Somerset Trust in 1978, showing Eleanor's explicit provisions and the true source of the funds. Those would be in First Atlantic's archives now, after the merger," Olivia pointed out. "Would your banker friend help us access them?" I shook my head. "Chen has already stretched professional boundaries by showing me what he has. Official archive access would require formal authorization that would take weeks, time we don't have." James had been listening quietly, his expression thoughtful. "There might be another way," he said finally. "Eleanor didn't trust institutions completely, even banks. She kept duplicate originals of important documents." "Where?" Olivia and I asked simultaneously. "Here at Maple Ridge." James stood up, moving toward the stone fireplace. This place was special to her, away from Richard's influence, away from William's publishing world. She called it her truth sanctuary. He knelt by the hearth, running his fingers along the edge of a particular stone in the fireplace surround. After a moment, he pressed a specific spot, and a section of stonework shifted slightly. James carefully removed the loose stone to reveal a small concealed compartment built into the masonry. "Eleanor showed me this hiding place after she sent that letter," he explained, reaching inside. "Said if I ever needed proof of her intentions, I'd find it here." From the hidden compartment, James withdrew a weathered metal box. It was small, but appeared to be solidly constructed, with a simple lock. From his pocket, he produced a key on an old leather fob. "She gave me this key the last time I saw her alive," he said softly. "Told me to use it only if absolutely necessary." Inside the box were several sealed envelopes, each labeled meticulously in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. James carefully sorted through them until he found one marked Trust, Original Documents and Provisions, 1978. The envelope contained exactly what we needed: the original trust document with Eleanor's signature, and those of the Somerset Trust officers, including official bank seals and notarizations. The language was explicit. "All direct descendants of Eleanor Campbell Mitchell shall benefit equally from the trust, and no beneficiary may be removed without unanimous written consent of all adult beneficiaries." Another document detailed the source of funds, a direct transfer from the James Harrington estate settlement, with a personal note from Harrington attached, "For Eleanor and all her children and their children to come. May they each find their own path with the freedom we were denied." "This is definitive," I said, carefully examining the papers. With these original documents, we can prove Dad's 1992 amendment violated the fundamental terms of the trust. There's something else, James said, extracting another envelope labeled, "For Richard, to be opened only in my absence." He handed it to me. I believe this was Eleanor's contingency plan if Richard ever tried to alter her intentions for the trust. The sealed envelope had never been opened. Inside was a letter addressed directly to my father, dated just weeks before Eleanor's death. Richard, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have taken actions regarding the family trust that have necessitated James sharing this letter with you. The money that formed the Mitchell family trust came from James Harrington, not from the publishing house. He left his fortune to me explicitly for the benefit of all my descendants, regardless of their chosen paths in life. Yes, Richard, all my descendants. I have always known you suspected the truth about James's parentage. Harrington was indeed his biological father. This fact changes nothing about your father's love for him or for you. William raised you both as his sons without distinction. But it perhaps explains your lifelong competitiveness toward your brother and your obsession with Mitchell blood in the family business. The trust was deliberately structured to prevent exactly what I fear you are now attempting, using financial control to force family members into your approved path. No beneficiary may be removed without unanimous consent, and these original documents, with their clear provisions, remain legally binding regardless of any amendments you may have implemented during William's incapacity. I loved you deeply, Richard, but I recognized your tendency to control rather than nurture. This letter is my final attempt to protect all my grandchildren from that tendency. If you choose to challenge these provisions in court, be aware that doing so will necessitate revealing the complete truth about the origin of the Mitchell family fortune and James's parentage. Revelations I have spent decades protecting for your father's sake. I hope instead you will honor my wishes and remember that true family legacy lies not in controlling your children's choices, but in supporting the unique paths they forge for themselves. With enduring love despite our differences, your mother, Eleanor. Olivia and I exchanged stunned glances as I finished reading. Grandma really did think of everything, I said quietly. She knew Richard better than anyone, James replied, including his weaknesses and what would matter most to him, family appearance and control of the narrative. My phone vibrated with an incoming call from Samantha Torres. Alex, the judge has scheduled an emergency hearing for Monday morning. On Pierce's motion, she reported. If your father succeeds, the injunction will be lifted, and they can proceed with removing you before our Wednesday hearing on the merits. We found the original trust documents, I told her, with explicit language preventing any beneficiary from being removed without unanimous consent. And we have much more. Evidence that the 1992 amendment was improperly executed while Grandpa was incapacitated, plus a letter from Grandma explaining her intentions. That changes everything, Samantha said. But we'll need to present all of it at tomorrow's hearing. Can you bring the documents to my office tonight? I'll need time to prepare our response. After agreeing to meet Samantha in Boston by evening, I turned back to James and Olivia. We need to decide how far we're willing to go with this, I said carefully. Presenting these documents in court means publicly revealing family history that's been kept secret for decades, including your biological parentage, Uncle James. Are we prepared for those consequences? James was silent for a long moment, absently, tracing the embossed seal on Eleanor's letter. I've lived my entire adult life knowing the truth but respecting Eleanor's wish to protect William's dignity. But she was also explicit that if Richard ever tried to use the trust against any of her descendants, the truth should come out. What about one more attempt to resolve this privately? Olivia suggested. Show Dad what we've found, give him the chance to withdraw the amendment without public disclosure. Will he listen? I asked skeptically. Perhaps not to you or me, James acknowledged. But Eleanor's letter to him might give him pause. It's one thing to dismiss us. It's another to defy his mother's explicit final wishes when confronted with her own words. It was a reasonable suggestion, and one that honored the family bonds that, despite everything, still tied us together. We agreed on a plan. Olivia would call our parents and request an urgent family meeting that evening at Cedar Grove. James would present Eleanor's letter and the original trust documents, offering Richard one final opportunity to withdraw the amendment before everything became part of the public court record. And if he refuses? I asked. Then we honor Eleanor's wishes over Richard's pride, James said firmly. The truth was always meant to be her final protection for her descendants. The drive back to Boston was tense, with Olivia making arrangements by phone while I contemplated the potential fallout. Nathan would be devastated to learn that his favored position in the family stemmed from my father's obsession with Mitchell blood, a concept now revealed to be more complicated than anyone had realized. My mother would face the public unraveling of family myths she'd helped maintain for decades, and my father's carefully constructed narrative about the source of the family fortune would collapse. Yet beneath these concerns, I felt an unexpected lightness. For years, I'd believed my exile from family approval stemmed from some fundamental deficiency in me, my unwillingness to follow the prescribed Mitchell path. Now I understood it was about something much older and deeper than my career choices. By late afternoon, we arrived at Cedar Grove Estate. My father's Mercedes and mother's Lexus were already in the circular drive, along with Uncle James's modest Honda. Surprisingly, Nathan's Tesla was also present. Apparently, my father had decided to include him in this family crisis. Helen Mitchell opened the door before we could ring the bell, her usual perfect composure noticeably strained. "Your father is in the study with James and Nathan," she said quietly. "This is highly irregular, Alexander. Pierce has advised against any meetings before Monday's hearing." "Some matters transcend legal strategy, Mom," I replied. "This is about family history that goes back decades." In the study, the atmosphere was glacial. My father stood behind his desk, ramrod straight in a casual but impeccable weekend sweater, looking every inch the publishing patriarch despite the informal setting. Nathan hovered nearby, visibly uncomfortable but clearly aligned with his uncle. Uncle James sat calmly in one of the leather chairs, the metal box from Maple Ridge on the desk before him. "I see you've involved Olivia in your schemes now," my father said by way of greeting. "Wasn't it enough to disrupt your own relationship with the family?" "This isn't about disruption, Dad," Olivia replied with unexpected firmness. "It's about truth. Something this family has been selective with for generations." My father's gaze hardened. "James has made certain claims about your grandmother and the origin of the family trust. Claims that are simply his interpretation of complex historical circumstances." "Not claims, Richard," James corrected gently. "Documented facts. Eleanor left explicit instructions and evidence, anticipating this very scenario." "Ancient family. Matters have no bearing on current financial decisions," my father dismissed. "The trust amendment is a simple restructuring based on present needs and contributions to family legacy." "Then you should have no objection to reviewing these before proceeding," I said, placing the original trust documents on his desk. "The founding documents that explicitly prevent any beneficiary from being removed without unanimous consent." My father didn't touch the papers. "Pierce has advised me not to examine any documents you've obtained through questionable means." "These didn't come from your files," James explained. "Eleanor kept duplicates at Maple Ridge, in a hiding place she showed me before her death. They're the original trust documents, Richard, with her explicit provisions." Something flickered in my father's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or concern that his mother had taken such precautions against his potential actions. "And there's this," James added, placing the sealed letter addressed to Richard on top of the documents. "From Eleanor, to be opened only if you ever attempted to use the trust against any of her descendants." My father stared at the envelope, recognition dawning as he identified his mother's handwriting. For a moment, the confident publisher facade slipped, revealing uncertainty. "Uncle Richard doesn't need to read old letters," Nathan interjected, stepping forward protectively. This is obviously a coordinated attempt to manipulate the situation before Monday's hearing. "Nathan, please," my mother said quietly from the doorway where she'd been listening. "Some matters go beyond legal maneuvering. Like the true origin of the Mitchell fortune," I suggested. "Or the reason Grandma created such specific provisions to protect all her descendants equally." Nathan looked confused. "What are you talking about? The trust came from Grandpa William's publishing success." "Actually, it didn't," James said gently. "The initial funds, all $2.3 million, came from James Harrington's estate. He left his fortune to Eleanor in 1977. "The shipping magnate?" Nathan frowned. "Why would he leave money to Grandma?" A heavy silence filled the room. My father reached slowly for the envelope, his hand not entirely steady. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately, Richard," my mother suggested, glancing meaningfully at Nathan. "Nathan stays," my father said firmly. "Whatever schemes they've concocted, he should hear them too." "It's not a scheme, Dad," Olivia said. "It's family history that affects all of us, especially your decision to remove Alex from the trust." With deliberate movements, my father opened Eleanor's letter. The study remained silent as he read, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to shock and finally to something approaching grief. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully, removed his reading glasses, and for perhaps the first time in my adult life, avoided meeting anyone's eyes. "Is it true?" he finally asked James. "All of it?" James nodded. "All of it." Eleanor confirmed everything to me after she sent that letter. She had evidence, photographs, letters between them spanning decades. Harrington watched my academic career from afar. He was proud, she said, though he could never acknowledge me publicly. "So you're not—" Nathan began, struggling to process the implications. "Not a Mitchell by blood," James confirmed gently, though William raised me as his son without question or distinction, a fact Eleanor treasured about him. My father seemed to age years in minutes, the carefully constructed family narrative he'd maintained for decades crumbling before him. "The bank records?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "All confirmed the transfer from Harrington's estate directly to Eleanor's account, then to the trust," I said. "First Atlantic has the complete documentation, inherited from Somerset Trust after the merger." "And the 1992 amendment," James added quietly, "processed while William was incapacitated, with your college roommate Theodore Whitman overseeing the transaction. An amendment that directly contravened Eleanor's explicit provisions requiring unanimous consent from beneficiaries for any removal." Nathan looked bewildered. "Is that why you've always pushed me to succeed in publishing? Because Uncle James isn't actually—" "Nathan, that's enough," my mother interjected firmly. "This isn't about you." But it was, in many ways. My father's obsession with Nathan continuing the true Mitchell legacy suddenly made perfect, if painful, sense. With James revealed as Harrington's biological son, Richard was the only real Mitchell of his generation, and Nathan, his sister's son who shared the Mitchell name, became the repository of all his hopes for the family publishing legacy. "If these documents are presented in court tomorrow," Samantha had advised me earlier, "everything becomes public record. James's parentage, the true source of the Mitchell fortune, the questionable 1992 amendment. The Mitchell publishing reputation would face significant scrutiny." I watched my father struggling with this reality, his lifelong devotion to the family's public image warring with his desire to maintain control over the trust. "What do you want?" he finally asked, looking directly at me for the first time. "What Grandma Eleanor wanted," I replied simply, "for all her descendants to benefit equally from the trust, regardless of their chosen paths. For the amendment proposal to be withdrawn, with acknowledgement that no beneficiary can be removed without unanimous consent. And if I agree? His voice was measured, the publisher negotiating terms. Then these documents remain private, James said. Eleanor's letter to you stays between us. My parentage remains a family matter, not public record. The truth doesn't disappear, Dad, Olivia added gently. But it doesn't have to destroy what matters, our family, imperfect as it is. My father was silent for a long moment, seemingly wrestling with decades of carefully maintained control and narratives. Finally, he reached for his phone. Pierce? Richard Mitchell. Cancel the emergency hearing for Monday. Yes, I'm certain. Withdraw the amendment proposal completely. Yes, I understand the implications. He ended the call without further explanation. The tension in the room slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. None of us quite knew how to proceed in this new reality, where long-buried truths lay exposed among us. I think, my mother said into the silence, we could all use some tea, or perhaps something stronger. As she led Nathan and Olivia toward the kitchen, my father remained seated, staring at Eleanor's letter. James and I stayed with him, recognizing that something important remained unresolved. Why did you never tell me? My father finally asked. James, his voice stripped of its usual authority. About Harrington being your father? Eleanor asked me not to, James replied simply. She said William had chosen to raise me as his son without question, and that truth should be honored above biology. She only revealed it to me after her death because she feared you might… Well, exactly what happened with the trust. I always suspected, my father admitted. There were rumors in publishing circles. And you were so different, academically brilliant, no interest in the business, nothing like William or me. Different doesn't mean less family, I said quietly. Isn't that what Grandma was trying to protect with the trust provisions? The right of each descendant to follow their own path while still remaining part of the family? My father looked at me with new consideration. You sound like her. Eleanor was always the stubborn idealist. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. William used to say she had more backbone than the entire Mitchell Publishing Board combined. She certainly outmaneuvered all of us from beyond the grave, James observed dryly. A startled laugh escaped my father, perhaps the first genuine one I'd heard from him in years. Yes, she would have enjoyed that, always 10 steps ahead. The moment of levity passed, replaced by a more thoughtful silence. I still believe in the Mitchell Publishing legacy, my father said eventually. It matters, what William built, what I've expanded. No one is disputing that, I assured him. But it's not the only valid path for a Mitchell or a Harrington, for that matter. Your marketing agency, he acknowledged reluctantly. Horizon Industries is a significant client. Coming from him, it was tantamount to effusive praise. We specialize in publishing and media clients, actually, I found myself explaining. Digital transformation strategies for traditional publishing houses. We've helped several historic firms navigate the transition to modern platforms. My father's eyebrows rose slightly, including competitors of Mitchell Publishing. Some, I admitted, but we've never taken on direct competitors in your primary markets, professional ethics. He nodded slowly, absorbing this information, with what seemed like genuine interest rather than judgment. It was a small shift, but a significant one. And you, he turned to James, all these years, knowing Harrington was your biological father, did it change how you felt about William? James shook his head firmly. William was my father in every way that mattered. He taught me to read, supported my academic interests even when they diverged from publishing, attended every school event. Biology is just genetics. Fatherhood is something else entirely. My father seemed to find some comfort in this assertion. He never treated You differently, even if he suspected. I remember him correcting anyone who ever suggested we weren't equally his sons. Because we were, James said simply. Just as Alex and Olivia and even Nathan are all equally Eleanor's grandchildren, regardless of their careers or choices. A knock at the study door interrupted the conversation. Samantha Torres stood in the doorway, looking professionally composed despite the weekend summons. I apologize for the intrusion, she said. Olivia let me in. I came as soon as I received notification that the hearing was canceled. Ms. Torres, my father acknowledged with a nod. The situation has been resolved privately. The amendment has been withdrawn. Samantha looked to me for confirmation, and I nodded. We've reached a family understanding. The original trust provisions will be honored. Relief flickered across her features. I'm glad to hear it. Family resolutions are always preferable to court battles. She handed me a business card. Call my office Monday to discuss dismissing our filings. After she departed, my father regarded me with grudging respect. You were prepared to take this all the way. I learned persistence from the Mitchell side, I replied, and principled stubbornness from Grandma Eleanor. A hint of amusement softened his expression. Fair enough. He picked up the original trust documents, studying them with newfound attention. These provisions are remarkably forward-thinking for 1978. Eleanor was visionary in many ways. She wanted to protect all her descendants' freedom to choose their own paths, James explained. Something she and Harrington were denied by social conventions of their time. My father nodded thoughtfully. The amendment will be formally withdrawn on Monday. The original provisions will stand. He looked directly at me. You remain a full beneficiary, as Eleanor intended. It was the outcome I'd fought for, yet somehow it felt secondary now to the deeper revelations about our family. Thank you, I said simply. Don't thank me, he replied with unexpected honesty. I was wrong to attempt the amendment. Eleanor's wishes were clear, and He hesitated. I allowed personal disappointments to cloud my judgment. Coming from Richard Mitchell, this near apology was extraordinary. Perhaps we all have opportunities to reconsider certain assumptions, I offered. Indeed. He gathered Eleanor's letter and carefully returned it to its envelope. I believe I'll keep this in a safer place. A reminder of sorts. As James and I rose to join the others in the kitchen, my father remained seated, seemingly lost in thought. At the door, he called my name. Alexander. This digital transformation work your agency does for publishers. I might be interested in hearing more about it. Not immediately, but perhaps soon. It wasn't a job offer or even a client proposition. More an opening, a small crack in a door that had been firmly closed for years. Whenever you're ready, I replied. I'm not going anywhere. In the kitchen, we found an unexpected tableau. Nathan and Olivia engaged in earnest conversation over teacups, with my mother adding cookies to a serving plate with mechanical precision, clearly processing the afternoon's revelations in her own methodical way. Everything all right? Olivia asked as we entered. The amendment has been withdrawn, I confirmed. The original trust provisions will stand. Relief washed over her face. Good. That's good. Nathan has something he'd like to say, my mother prompted gently. Nathan stood, visibly uncomfortable, but determined. I've been thinking about the digital publishing platform I've been developing. It needs work. He looked directly at me for perhaps the first time without competitiveness or resentment. Your agency has expertise in digital transformation for publishers. I could use some professional guidance, paid consultation. Of course. The offer caught me completely off guard. I'd be happy to review what you're working on, I found myself saying. We could start with an informal assessment. That would be helpful, Nathan said stiffly, but with what seemed like genuine relief. As Uncle James began helping my mother with the tea service, a domestic task I'd never seen a man perform in this house before, I caught Olivia's eye. She smiled slightly and shrugged as if to say, "Stranger things have happened." And indeed, they had. In the space of a week, generations of family secrets had unraveled, revealing a more complex and ultimately more human history than the polished narrative I'd been raised with. James Harrington and Eleanor Campbell's thwarted love. William Mitchell's quiet dignity in raising another man's son as his own. My grandmother's foresight in protecting her descendants' freedom of choice through careful trust provisions. Even my father's flawed but understandable desire to preserve what he saw as the Mitchell legacy. None of it was the simple story of publishing success and Mitchell exceptionalism I'd grown up with. It was messier, more painful, but also richer and more authentic. As we gathered around the kitchen table, a space usually reserved for staff, not family gatherings, the conversation remained cautious but notably free of the usual tensions and performance. Nathan asked reasonably intelligent questions about digital marketing strategies. My mother inquired about a new client project with what seemed like genuine interest. Uncle James shared anecdotes about Eleanor that painted her as far more determined and strategic than the supportive publishing wife I'd always envisioned. My father joined us eventually, still subdued, but making visible efforts to engage differently. When he mentioned Mitchell Publishing's quarterly results, he did so not as a rebuke to my different path, but simply as family news to be shared. Small steps, imperfect ones, but movement nonetheless toward what Eleanor had perhaps hoped for all along, a family defined not by rigid adherence to a singular legacy, but by respect for each member's unique contribution. By evening, as Olivia and I prepared to leave, Uncle James pulled me aside in the front hallway. "Eleanor would be proud of you," he said quietly. "Not just for standing your ground, but for seeking truth while still valuing family bonds." "I had a good example in you," I replied. "Standing between two worlds all these years, honoring both William's love and Eleanor's truth." He smiled slightly. "Family is rarely the simple narrative we try to make it. It's contradictions and compromises, secrets and sacrifices. The truest legacies often lie in what goes unspoken." "Not anymore," I observed. "At least not about this." "No," he agreed. "And perhaps that's Eleanor's final gift to us all. Freedom from secrets too long maintained." As Olivia and I drove away from Cedar Grove Estate, the grand house that had always symbolized the Mitchell legacy appeared somehow different in the evening light, not diminished by the revelations about its funding source or the complicated history behind its prosperity, but more human, more authentic in its imperfections. "Do you think things will actually change?" Olivia asked, watching the house recede in the side mirror. "Some will, some won't," I replied honestly. "Dad is still Dad. The publishing legacy still matters deeply to him, but maybe there's room now for different interpretations of what family contribution means." "Nathan seemed almost human when asking about your marketing expertise," she observed with a hint of amusement. "Miracles never cease," I agreed, though I suspect his sudden interest has something to do with Dad's revelation, that he wants to discuss digital transformation with me soon. "Always the competition with those two," Olivia sighed. "At least now you know it wasn't personal, just Dad's complicated relationship with legacy and bloodlines." As we reached the main road, my phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Heard the emergency hearing was canceled? Good resolution?" "Better than expected," I replied. "Family truths revealed, original provisions upheld. Thank you for your help." His response came quickly. "Glad to hear it. Perhaps your grandmother and my mother were right. Some truths should always be available, even when not discussed." I smiled at the echo of Eleanor's philosophy. The Mitchell family trust would continue as she had intended, supporting all her descendants equally as they forged their own paths. The truth about its origins and James's parentage would remain within the family, honored but no longer weaponized. And as for my place in that family? For the first time in years, it felt less like an exile and more like a different but equally valid branch of the same tree, exactly as Eleanor had intended when she enshrined her wishes in those trust provisions. All those years ago, you know, Olivia mused as we drove toward the city. Grandma Eleanor was pretty remarkable, orchestrating all this protection for us from decades ago. She was, I agreed. Makes you wonder what other surprises might be waiting in that metal box at Maple Ridge. Olivia laughed. One family revelation at a time is enough, don't you think? Absolutely, I conceded. But it's nice to know the truth was always there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Like water finding cracks, some truths cannot be contained forever, especially when guarded by someone as determined as Eleanor Mitchell, who understood that the most valuable family legacy isn't money or business success, but the freedom for each generation to define success on their own terms. Monday morning arrived with a sense of cautious optimism. After confirming with Samantha that my father had indeed formally withdrawn the amendment proposal, I returned to work with a strange mixture of relief and disorientation. The marketing agency I'd built over 7 years, the career choice that had initially sparked the rift with my father, now felt like a sanctuary of normalcy amid the upheaval of family revelations. You look different, Megan observed as I reviewed the week's client schedule at our morning briefing. Less tense. Family matters, I explained vaguely. Finally resolved. She nodded, wisely not pressing for details. Well, whatever it was, I'm glad it's sorted. Horizon Industries scheduled a follow-up meeting for Thursday. They loved the campaign concepts. I threw myself into work, grateful for the familiar routine of client calls and creative reviews. By midday, however, an unexpected name appeared on my caller ID, Nathan Mitchell. Alex, he began without preamble, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. About that consultation offer, for my digital platform. Are you still willing to review it? Of course, I replied, surprised by his initiative. When were you thinking? Would tomorrow work? I could come to your office, see your operation firsthand. The suggestion that Nathan would come to my territory rather than summoning me to his was novel enough to indicate a genuine shift. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock? Perfect. And Alex? He paused awkwardly. Thanks. For not, making this more difficult than it needed to be. The admission of vulnerability from my perpetually competitive cousin was perhaps more shocking than any of the trust revelations. Family is complicated enough without adding unnecessary drama, I offered. Right. Yes. Exactly. He sounded relieved. See you tomorrow? After ending the call, I sat contemplating this new development. Nathan seeking my professional guidance represented a seismic shift in our relationship, one that would have been unthinkable just days ago. My desk phone buzzed. Alex, David Chen from First Atlantic Financial is here to see you, Megan announced. He doesn't have an appointment. Surprised, I asked her to send him in. Chen entered my office with his usual precise demeanor, though he seemed slightly less formal than during our previous bank meetings. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, declining my offer of coffee. I wanted to deliver these documents personally rather than through courier. He handed me a sealed envelope bearing the First Atlantic logo. What's this? Your father visited the bank this morning, Chen explained. He requested complete documentation of the Mitchell Family Trust, including all amendments and the original formation documents. He also authorized full disclosure of these records to all named beneficiaries. I stared at the envelope in surprise. He specifically included me in this authorization? He insisted on it, Chen confirmed with a small smile. Said something about honoring Eleanor's intentions fully and ensuring all beneficiaries had equal access to trust information going forward. Opening the envelope, I found comprehensive trust documentation, From the original 1978 formation through all subsequent activities, including the now withdrawn 1992 amendment. Most surprising was a cover letter on Mitchell Publishing letterhead, in my father's distinctive handwriting. To all Mitchell Family Trust beneficiaries, recent events have prompted a reevaluation of trust management practices. Moving forward, all beneficiaries will receive quarterly statements and complete transparency regarding trust activities. Any future amendments will require written notification to all parties and adherence to the original unanimous consent provision. The enclosed documents represent the complete trust history. I encourage all beneficiaries to familiarize themselves with the terms that Eleanor Mitchell established. Richard Mitchell, trustee. It wasn't an apology. My father rarely offered those, but it represented a significant concession to transparency and acknowledgement of Eleanor's original intentions. This is unexpected, I admitted to Chen. Your father also initiated discussion about establishing a more formal trustee oversight committee, Chen added, including representatives from all beneficiary branches of the family. That's remarkably democratic for him. Chen's expression remained professional, but his eyes conveyed understanding. Family dynamics can evolve in surprising ways when long-held assumptions are challenged. After he departed, I called Olivia to share the development. Dad's making real changes to the trust administration, I explained. Transparency, oversight, everything. I know, she confirmed. He sent me the same packet this morning. He's also invited Uncle James to dinner tomorrow, just the two of them. Really? What do you think that's about? Not sure, but Mom mentioned something about them discussing William's diaries. Apparently, Dad found them while reorganizing his study and thought James might want them. That's actually thoughtful of him. People can surprise you, Olivia said, even Richard Mitchell. By Wednesday, subtle but meaningful shifts in family dynamics continued. My mother called to invite me to Sunday dinner. No pressure, just if you're available, without the usual implication that attendance was mandatory for maintaining family standing. Uncle James emailed to share that his conversation with my father had been difficult but necessary, decades overdue, and that they had discussed William's knowledge about James's parentage more openly than ever before. Most surprising was an email from Jonathan Pierce, informing all beneficiaries that the Mitchell Family Trust would now be administered with quarterly meetings open to all adult beneficiaries, with minutes distributed afterward. The message included a personal note. Your grandmother would approve of these changes. She was remarkably forward-thinking in her original trust design. Thursday afternoon brought Nathan to my office, clutching a tablet with his digital publishing platform prototype. As I gave him a tour of Mitchell Creative, I noticed him studying our workspace with genuine curiosity. You've built something impressive here, he acknowledged as we settled into the conference room. How many people now? 15 full-time, plus a network of specialized contractors for specific project needs. And all self-financed? The question held none of his usual competitiveness, just professional interest. Mostly. I took a small business loan initially, paid it off within 3 years. We've been profitable since year 2. Something like respect flickered across his features. That's actually remarkable considering the agency failure rate. We found our niche, helping traditional publishers navigate digital transformation. It's specialized enough to command premium rates but broad enough to maintain a diverse client base. Nathan nodded thoughtfully before turning to his tablet. That's actually why I wanted your perspective. My platform is designed for small to mid-sized publishers who can't afford enterprise-level systems. As he walked me through his concept, I was surprised by its potential. The core idea, a modular publishing system that could scale with a company's growth, addressed a genuine market need. The execution, however, revealed Nathan's limited understanding of user experience and publisher workflows. You've identified a real pain point, I acknowledged when he finished. But your approach is too technology-focused rather than workflow-oriented. Meaning? Publishers don't think in terms of technical architecture. They think in terms of manuscripts, editorial, calendars, production schedules. Your interface needs to speak their language, not force them to learn yours. For the next 2 hours, we dissected his prototype, identifying strengths and weaknesses. To my surprise, Nathan took notes diligently, occasionally defending his choices, but mostly absorbing the feedback with uncharacteristic humility. "This is actually incredibly helpful," he admitted as we wrapped up. "Would you consider a more formal consultation arrangement? Paid, of course. I'd need to check potential client conflicts, but provisionally, yes." He hesitated, then added, "Uncle Richard mentioned you might present some digital transformation options for Mitchell Publishing as well." I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise. "He mentioned something similar. I'd be happy to prepare some initial thoughts." "Just so you know," Nathan said carefully, I encouraged him to explore it. "Your agency's track record speaks for itself." The admission that Nathan had actually advocated for my involvement represented perhaps the most significant shift yet in our relationship. "I appreciate that." As he was leaving, Nathan paused at the door. "This whole trust situation, it made me realize some things. About competition and family and—" he shrugged, uncomfortable with the emotional territory. "Anyway, I'm glad it worked out the way Grandma intended." "Me too," I replied simply. The following week brought another unexpected development. David Chen called to schedule a meeting at First Atlantic, explaining that some additional historical documents related to the Mitchell Trust had been located in their archives. "Nothing that affects the current structure," he assured me, "but items of potential family interest that Eleanor Mitchell specifically designated to be shared with her grandchildren after certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" "Resolution of any disputes regarding beneficiary status," Chen explained. "With the withdrawal of the amendment proposal, those conditions have now been satisfied." Curious, I arranged to meet him the following afternoon. When I arrived at First Atlantic's imposing headquarters, Chen led me not to our usual conference room, but to a private viewing room typically reserved for clients examining valuable documents or accessing safe deposit contents. These materials were sealed with instructions that they be shared with Eleanor Mitchell's grandchildren only after any challenges to their beneficiary status were resolved, Chen explained, placing an archival box on the table. With the recent trust developments, my supervisor authorized their release. The box contained several items: a leather-bound journal with Eleanor's monogram, a small collection of photographs, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For my grandchildren." "Would you prefer privacy to examine these?" Chen offered. "Yes, thank you." After he departed, I carefully opened the envelope first, finding a letter dated just weeks before Eleanor's death. "My dear grandchildren, if you are reading this, it means one of you has faced challenge to your rightful place in the family trust, and that challenge has been resolved in accordance with my original intentions. I am sorry you had to experience such difficulty, but perhaps it has led to greater understanding of our family's complex history. The journal enclosed contains my personal account of the years 1942-1948, my time with James Harrington, and the circumstances that led to my marriage to William Mitchell. I have never shared these memories during my lifetime to protect people. I loved deeply, but I believe you deserve to know the full truth of your heritage. The photographs include rare images of James Harrington that have never been publicly displayed. You may notice certain familiar features that persist through generations, nature's way of preserving connections even when society demanded they remain hidden. I established the Mitchell Family Trust with funds from James Harrington's estate, for a specific purpose, to ensure that all my descendants would have the freedom to choose their own paths without financial coercion. James and I were denied the freedom to follow our hearts due to social conventions and family expectations. I determined that future generations would not face similar constraints. Whatever divisions or difficulties prompted this letter's release, I hope you can now move forward with greater understanding and respect for each individual's right to define their own journey while remaining connected to their family roots. With eternal love, Eleanor Campbell Mitchell. With reverent care, I opened the journal, finding page after page of Eleanor's elegant handwriting documenting a love story I'd never imagined. She had been introduced to James Harrington at a charity function where she was volunteering, a chance meeting that altered both their lives. Despite their age difference and social distinctions, they developed first a friendship, then a deep intellectual connection, and finally, a love affair conducted, largely in private due to the constraints of 1940s Boston society. The most poignant entries detailed the discovery of her pregnancy in late 1947 and the agonizing decisions that followed. Harrington, divorced and considerably older, proposed marriage despite the scandal it would cause. Eleanor, concerned about the impact on his business standing and her family's reputation, declined. Instead, she accepted William Mitchell's proposal, a young publisher who had been courting her casually and who, upon learning of her condition, offered marriage without judgment. "William knows the child is not his," she wrote. "He says it doesn't matter, that he will love this baby as his own. His generosity of spirit humbles me, though my heart remains with James. Perhaps this is my penance for loving unwisely, yet too well, to build a life with a good man I respect but do not love passionately, while carrying the child of the man I cannot have." Later entries revealed that James Harrington maintained discreet contact over the years, following young James's academic achievements from afar. While he never interfered in the Mitchell family, he clearly never forgot Eleanor or their child. The final journal entry from December 1947 was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "Said goodbye to James today. He held me one last time and promised that someday, somehow, he would ensure our child's future. I believe him. He has never broken a promise to me. William awaits with patience and kindness. I will be a good wife to him and mother to all his children, including the one who carries another man's blood, but will bear the Mitchell name. May God forgive the necessary deceptions that will shape our lives from this day forward." The photographs were equally revealing. Eleanor and Harrington in private moments, his resemblance to Uncle James unmistakable once you knew to look for it. One image showed Harrington standing proudly near a university where young James was, apparently attending an academic event, watching from a distance, unable to claim his son publicly, but unwilling to miss witnessing his achievements. I sat back, emotionally drained from this intimate glimpse into my grandmother's hidden life. The Eleanor who emerged from these materials was not the proper publishing wife of family lore, but a complex woman who had made difficult choices in an era that offered few options to women in her situation. Most striking was William Mitchell's role in this story, accepting another man's child, maintaining that acceptance throughout his life, creating a family where legal definitions of fatherhood mattered less than the daily acts of parenting and love. It cast my grandfather, whom I barely remembered, in an entirely new light. When Chen returned, I asked, "Are there copies of these materials for Olivia and Nathan as well?" "Similar packets have been prepared for all of Eleanor Mitchell's grandchildren," he confirmed. "They can be collected at their convenience." That evening, I called Olivia to tell her about Eleanor's journal and letters. She listened in silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly absorbing this new perspective on our grandmother's life. "It changes everything, doesn't it?" she finally said. "Not just about Uncle James's parentage, but about who Grandma and Grandpa really were, as people, not just as family icons." "William Mitchell might be the most remarkable person in this whole story," I observed. "Accepting another man's child, creating a family without resentment or conditions." "No wonder Grandma was so determined to protect all descendants equally in the trust," Olivia mused. "She knew firsthand how family acceptance could be conditional and wanted to ensure we'd all be treated better than she feared she might have been." The following Sunday, I found myself driving to Cedar Grove Estate for family dinner, the first I had attended voluntarily in years. The house looked the same, but my perception of it had fundamentally changed. This wasn't just the symbol of Mitchell Publishing's success. It was where Eleanor had built a life based on complicated choices, where William had demonstrated quiet dignity by raising James as his own, where generations of family history, both acknowledged and unspoken, had unfolded. Helen Mitchell greeted me with her usual perfect hostess manner, though there was a new softness in her expression. "Alex, we're so glad you could join us." In the parlor, I found Uncle James deep in conversation with my father, not the strained politeness of previous family gatherings, but an engaged discussion about old family photographs spread across the coffee table. Alexander, my father, acknowledged with a nod that, while not effusive, lacked its usual judgment. "James was just helping identify some of the people in these pre-war photos of your grandmother. Found them in William's diaries," James explained. "He was quite the amateur photographer in his younger days." Nathan arrived moments later, followed by Olivia. As we moved to the dining room, I noticed subtle but significant changes in our family dynamic. My father asked about my recent client presentations with genuine interest. Uncle James shared anecdotes about academic colleagues without my father's usual dismissive comments about ivory tower theories. Nathan described his digital platform progress, openly crediting my consultation for recent improvements. Midway through dinner, my father cleared his throat, a gesture that traditionally preceded some form of pronouncement. "I've been reviewing the Mitchell Publishing digital strategy," he began. "It's become clear we're behind the curve on several fronts." Nathan and I exchanged glances, uncertain where this was heading. "After consulting with the board, I've decided to create a formal digital transformation committee," he continued. "Nathan will represent the internal development team, and," he looked directly at me, "I'd like Mitchell Creative to serve as external consultants, providing objective assessment and recommendations." The offer, a professional recognition I'd never expected from my father, momentarily left me speechless. I'd be happy to develop a proposal," I finally managed. "Good. The committee meets monthly. The first session is scheduled for next week." It wasn't a grand emotional reconciliation. Richard Mitchell would likely never be comfortable with overt displays of feeling, but it represented a significant professional olive branch. After dinner, as James and I helped clear dishes, another novel development in the Mitchell household, where men had traditionally retreated to discuss business while women handled domestic matters, he murmured, "Eleanor would be pleased." "About the digital committee?" "About all of it," he clarified. "The trust transparency, Richard's gradual acceptance, even Nathan seeking your expertise." She believed deeply in each person contributing their unique strengths to the family, not conforming to a single approved model. Later, as I prepared to leave, my father appeared in the front hallway. "A moment, Alexander?" He led me into his study, the room that had been the site of so many tense confrontations over the years. From his desk drawer, he withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I found this among Eleanor's personal effects," he said, handing it to me. "I believe she would have wanted you to have it." Unwrapping the tissue revealed a beautifully crafted fountain pen with a subtle Art Deco design. "It belonged to James Harrington," my father explained quietly. "He used it to sign all important documents. Eleanor kept it after his death. One of the few personal items she retained from their relationship." The significance of my father giving me this particular item, acknowledging not just Eleanor's hidden past, but the legitimacy of Harrington's place in our family history, was profound. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not Uncle James?" "James has other keepsakes from Harrington, things Eleanor left specifically for him. This," he gestured to the pen, "she designated for the grandchild who forges their own path. Given recent events, that seems appropriately you." I examined the pen carefully, noticing elegant initials engraved on the gold band, JH. "Thank you," I said simply. "This means a lot." My father nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional undercurrent, but committed to the gesture nonetheless. Eleanor was wiser than I often gave her credit for. Her provisions for the trust protected family bonds I might have damaged permanently through my inflexibility. Coming from Richard Mitchell, this oblique acknowledgement of error was equivalent to a lengthy apology from anyone else. "We all have our blind spots," I offered. "Family dynamics tend to amplify them." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed. Well, the Digital Transformation Committee meets Tuesday at 10. I look forward to your professional contribution." As I drove away from Cedar Grove that evening, the weight of Harrington's pen in my pocket served as a tangible reminder of how the past shapes present relationships in ways both visible and hidden. Eleanor's secret love, William's quiet acceptance, James Harrington's distant devotion to a son he could never publicly claim. All these threads had woven together to create the complex tapestry of the Mitchell family. The trust that had initially triggered this conflict had become, as Eleanor intended, a mechanism for honest reckoning rather than continued control. By protecting all beneficiaries equally, she had created circumstances that eventually forced the family to confront long-buried truths and, in doing so, forge healthier connections based on authentic understanding rather than curated narratives. The following day, I placed Harrington's pen on my desk at Mitchell Creative, a reminder that legacy comes in many forms, not all of them obvious or traditional. As I prepared materials for the upcoming Digital Transformation Committee meeting, I reflected on how my professional expertise, once viewed as a rejection of family tradition, was now being recognized as a valuable contribution to the Mitchell Publishing legacy. Later that week, David Chen called with an unexpected update. "I thought you might want to know. Your father has initiated changes to the trust administration structure. He's proposed creating a rotating trustee position, with representatives from each branch of the family serving 2-year terms alongside the permanent trustee. That's a significant decentralization of control," I observed. "Very unlike him." He cited Eleanor's original intention for equal representation as inspiration, Chen noted. "The first rotating trustee nominee is James Mitchell." The symmetry was perfect. The son whose existence had originally been concealed would now help oversee the trust created from his biological father's fortune, ensuring Eleanor's wishes for all her descendants continued to be honored. That weekend, Olivia invited me to join her at Maple Ridge. "I think we should properly catalog what's in Eleanor's metal box," she suggested. "Create a family archive of sorts." The small cabin felt different now, less a recreational retreat and more a sanctuary of family truth. As we carefully examined each document in Eleanor's hidden collection, a more nuanced family history emerged. William's quiet dignity, Richard's complex relationship with his father and brother, Eleanor's careful provision for future generations while navigating societal constraints of her era. "She really did think of everything," Olivia marveled, examining Eleanor's meticulous notes about the trust formation. "Every contingency, every potential family dispute. She created mechanisms to resolve them before they could fracture relationships permanently. She understood the damage secrets and control can do to families," I reflected. Having lived with both, she designed protections against their worst effects. That evening, sitting on the cabin's porch watching sunset over the lake, Olivia asked thoughtfully, "Do you think she knew it would play out this way? That eventually these revelations would be necessary?" "I think she hoped they wouldn't be," I replied. "That Richard would respect her intentions without requiring the full truth to be exposed. But she prepared for the possibility that protecting some family members might eventually require challenging others." "Like you," Olivia noted, "the independent grandchild following his own path." "And you," I countered. "The doctor who chose..." Healing over publishing? She smiled. To Eleanor, then, who gave us the freedom to choose our own definitions of success. And to William, I added, who demonstrated that family bonds transcend biology and expectations. As darkness settled over Maple Ridge, I felt a sense of completion. The trust that had originally been designed to provide financial security had ultimately delivered something far more valuable: authentic understanding of our family history and honest recognition of each member's unique place within it. Eleanor Campbell Mitchell had orchestrated this outcome decades before any of us recognized its necessity. In protecting all her descendants equally, she had ensured that when the moment of reckoning finally arrived, truth would prevail over. Convenient narratives and genuine family bonds would survive the revelation of long-buried secrets. The Mitchell Family Trust would continue, but transformed, no longer a mechanism for control, but a structure for collaborative stewardship, exactly as Eleanor had intended when she converted James Harrington's inheritance into a legacy for all, their descendants. 6 months after the trust revelations, Mitchell Creative hosted a launch party for our newest division, Mitchell Digital Consulting. The elegant rooftop venue overlooked Boston's financial district, a deliberate choice that positioned us within view of both First Atlantic Financial and the Mitchell Publishing headquarters. Quite the symbolic location, David Chen observed, accepting a glass of champagne as he joined me near the edge of the terrace. Bridging family legacy and independent success. I thought it was appropriately poetic, I acknowledged with a smile. The evening represented the formal beginning of a partnership I could never have imagined half a year earlier. Mitchell Creative would now provide dedicated digital transformation services to publishing houses, with Mitchell Publishing as our flagship client. My father had not only accepted my expertise, but had publicly embraced it as essential to the family company's future. Alex, the Horizon team has arrived, Megan informed me, professional as always despite the celebratory atmosphere. And your family just checked in downstairs. Family. The word carried new dimensions now. My parents entered first. My father in his customary impeccable suit. My mother, elegant in midnight blue. Behind them came Uncle James, who had recently been confirmed as the first rotating trustee for the Mitchell Family Trust. Olivia arrived with her hospital colleague Daniel, whose transition from professional acquaintance to something more personal had been a pleasant development in recent months. Even Nathan appeared, accompanied by his new fiancée Lorraine, a literary agent whose practical market insights had apparently helped refine his digital platform into something genuinely promising. Quite the turnout, my father observed, surveying the crowded space with professional assessment. Impressive client representation. From him, this was effusive praise. 4 major publishing houses, plus their digital directors, I confirmed. The Mitchell digital consulting model is generating significant industry interest. As it should, he acknowledged, surprising me with what seemed like genuine pride. Your understanding of both traditional publishing values and digital necessities is uniquely valuable. We were interrupted by the arrival of Jonathan Pierce, whose formal legal demeanor seemed somewhat at odds with the celebration. Alex, Richard, congratulations on this new venture, he offered. An innovative approach to preserving publishing traditions while embracing technological evolution. The Mitchell way, my father responded with unexpected magnanimity. Adapting, while honoring core values. Pierce nodded appreciatively before lowering his voice. The Trust quarterly meeting is scheduled for next week. The new transparency protocols have been fully implemented. All beneficiaries will receive comprehensive documentation in advance. Excellent, my father replied, with none of the resistance such diminished control would have previously triggered. As Pierce moved away to greet other guests, my father turned back to me. Eleanor would have approved of all this, he said quietly. The collaboration, the innovation, the family unity despite our different approaches. Coming from Richard Mitchell, a man who had built his identity around singular authority and traditional succession, This represented remarkable evolution. I think she orchestrated it, I suggested. In her own way, decades ago. A hint of a smile touched his features. Quite possibly. She always did think several moves ahead. The evening progressed with the seamless networking and strategic connections that define successful business events, but with an underlying current of something more meaningful. This wasn't just the launch of a new business division. It was the public manifestation of a transformed family dynamic. Uncle James found me later near the bar, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him at family functions. Quite a journey from that email about the trust amendment, he observed. Sometimes destruction is necessary for reconstruction, I replied, though I would have preferred a less dramatic catalyst. He laughed softly. Eleanor might say the same, about her own life choices. The painful separation from Harrington ultimately created the conditions for all of this. The trust, the provisions protecting individual choices, even the business opportunities now emerging from our reconciliation. Across the room, Nathan was explaining his digital platform to several publishing executives, his presentation confidence tempered with a new humility and attention to audience needs that reflected our months of consultation work together. He's improved significantly, James noted, following my gaze. Once he stopped trying to impress my father and started focusing on actual market needs, his concept found its footing, I explained. He's quite knowledgeable about publishing workflows when he's not busy positioning himself as the true Mitchell heir. Legacy takes many forms, James observed thoughtfully. William understood that when he raised me as his son despite knowing I wasn't his biological child. Eleanor understood it when she protected all her descendants equally in the trust. Perhaps Richard is finally understanding it too, recognizing your contribution to the Mitchell legacy despite its untraditional form. The formal presentation portion of the evening arrived, and I found myself at the podium introducing Mitchell Digital Consulting to the assembled industry leaders. As I outlined our vision for helping traditional publishing houses navigate digital transformation while preserving their core editorial values, I noticed my father nodding with genuine agreement. The publishing industry stands at a crossroads, I concluded. But with thoughtful integration of tradition and innovation, we can preserve what matters most, the cultivation and distribution of ideas, while embracing new methods of reaching readers. This is the Mitchell approach, spanning generations but always evolving. The applause was gratifying, but more meaningful was my father stepping forward to shake my hand publicly as the presentation ended, a gesture of professional respect that carried deeper personal significance for those who understood our history. As guests began departing later that evening, Olivia joined me on the terrace. "Quite the triumph," she observed, indicating the Mitchell publishing executives engaged in animated conversation with my team members. "Professional and personal." "A good beginning," I agreed. "Though I suspect maintaining this balanced relationship will require ongoing effort from everyone involved. Family always does," she noted wisely. "Speaking of which, have you visited Maple Ridge recently?" "Not since we cataloged Eleanor's documents. Why?" "I was thinking we should make it a regular gathering place, neutral territory for family, connections outside the publishing world. Maybe a monthly dinner, open to everyone but without business agendas." The suggestion represented exactly the kind of balanced approach Eleanor might have advocated, honoring family bonds while preserving individual boundaries. "I think that's an excellent idea." As the evening concluded, David Chen approached with a small package. "This arrived at the bank yesterday, addressed to you," he explained. "It was in our historical archives, with instructions to be delivered 6 months after the trust matter was resolved." Curious, I opened the package to find a small leather journal and a brief note in unfamiliar handwriting. "For Alexander Mitchell, with appreciation for honoring Eleanor's wishes for her descendants. Your grandmother was the most remarkable woman I ever knew, and would be proud of your independent spirit." James Harrington entrusted these additional journals to Somerset Trust with instructions for them to be preserved until needed. Eleanor. Never knew he kept these records of their time together. May they provide further understanding of your family's true heritage. Martha Pearson. Daughter of Marcus Pearson, Trust Manager, 1970-1985, Somerset Trust. Another piece of the puzzle, I murmured, carefully examining the journal. Family histories are rarely as straightforward as they appear, Chen observed. Each generation reinterprets the past according to their present needs. And sometimes the past reaches forward to correct those interpretations, I added, thinking of Eleanor's meticulous arrangements to protect her descendants' freedom of choice. The following Sunday, I brought Harrington's journal to the first of Olivia's proposed family gatherings at Maple Ridge. The small cabin felt warmer somehow with the presence of multiple generations. My parents, Uncle James, Nathan and Lauren, Olivia and Daniel, even Samantha Torres, whose professional intervention had evolved into genuine friendship. After dinner, as we gathered in the main room with its stone fireplace, the same one that had concealed Eleanor's critical documents, I shared Martha Pearson's note and the newly discovered journal. It seems our family archival project isn't quite complete, I explained. Uncle James accepted the journal with visible emotion. Harrington's personal account, he said softly, examining the handwriting, after all these years. As he began reading selected passages aloud, a more complete picture emerged of the man whose love for Eleanor had ultimately funded the Mitchell Family Trust. His intelligence, his integrity, his anguish at their necessary separation, his pride in watching his son's academic achievements from afar, all recorded in precise, thoughtful prose that revealed character traits that had indeed persisted through generations. Most touching was his final entry, dated shortly before his death in 1977. I have arranged my affairs to provide for Eleanor and all her descendants, including the son I was never permitted to acknowledge publicly. My fortune will pass to her, with no restrictions save one, that it benefit all her descendants equally, regardless of their chosen paths. This is my final gift to her, and to the child we shared, freedom from the same societal constraints that kept us apart. Perhaps in future generations, Mitchell descendants will forge their own ways without judgment or conditional acceptance. That would be the finest legacy I could hope for, far more meaningful than shipping companies or financial assets. When James finished reading, a thoughtful silence filled the cabin. My father, who had listened without comment, finally spoke. He was a man of principle, he acknowledged quietly. As was William, accepting another man's child without reservation. I've spent decades focused on the Mitchell Publishing legacy while overlooking the more important legacy of character they both demonstrated. It was perhaps the most honest self-reflection I'd ever heard from my father, an admission that transcended business concerns to touch on deeper values. The Mitchell legacy isn't just publishing, I suggested. It's integrity in difficult circumstances. William showed it by raising James as his own. Eleanor showed it by protecting all her descendants equally. And you've shown it, Dad, by accepting hard truths and adapting your perspective. My father nodded, visibly moved despite his customary emotional reserve. Perhaps that's the most valuable inheritance, not trust funds or publishing houses, but the capacity to recognize what truly matters beyond conventional expectations. As the evening continued, conversations flowed more naturally than at any previous family gathering I could remember. Nathan discussed his digital platform without competitive posturing. Olivia shared hospital stories that my father listened to with genuine interest, rather than comparing to publishing achievements. Uncle James spoke openly about academic research he was conducting on family businesses across generations, with my father offering relevant publishing case studies rather than dismissing academic theory. Later, as we gathered on the porch overlooking the moonlit lake, Uncle James placed Harrington's journal carefully back in its protective covering. "Family history is never quite what it seems on the surface," he observed. "Each generation views it through their own lens, emphasizing certain elements while minimizing others." "The Mitchell family narrative certainly got complicated," Nathan acknowledged with unexpected self-awareness. "I spent years trying to be the true Mitchell heir, without understanding what that actually meant beyond the publishing connection." Eleanor understood, I reflected. She created structures to protect individual choices while maintaining family connections. The trust wasn't just about financial security. It was about preserving each person's freedom to define their own success while remaining part of the larger family story. As the gathering eventually dispersed, my father lingered behind, examining the stone fireplace where Eleanor had hidden her most important documents. "She always did love this place," he said quietly. "Said it was where she felt most authentically herself. Away from expectations and prescribed roles," I suggested. He nodded thoughtfully. "I spent decades trying to control the Mitchell narrative. Who belonged, who didn't, what constituted acceptable participation in the family legacy. I never realized Eleanor had created a much more enduring legacy through her trust provisions. A legacy of freedom with connection," I offered. "Supporting each person's individual journey while maintaining family bonds." "Precisely." He turned to face me directly. "Your agency's work with Mitchell Publishing? It's good work, Alexander. Innovative but respectful of core values. Different from what I envisioned for you, but valuable in its own right." From Richard Mitchell, this represented extraordinary recognition, acknowledgement that contribution to family legacy could take forms he hadn't anticipated or controlled. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." As we locked up the cabin and prepared to leave, I noticed Eleanor's wind chimes moving gently in the evening breeze, another small detail of her presence that had outlasted her physical life. Like her trust provisions and carefully preserved documents, they continued to make their presence felt, subtle but persistent reminders of values that transcended generations. The Mitchell family would continue to evolve, each member contributing their unique perspective to a shared legacy that was richer and more complex than any single narrative could capture. Eleanor had understood this decades ago, creating mechanisms to protect that diversity of contribution even when those entrusted with family leadership temporarily lost sight of its value. In the end, the trust that my parents had tried to remove me from had become the very instrument that restored more authentic family connections, exactly as Eleanor Campbell Mitchell had intended when she converted James Harrington's inheritance into a legacy for all their descendants. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.